You know, the North got clobbered in the first 2 years of the Civil War. You had Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, the two battles of Bull Run, terrible defeats on the part of the North, and it looked very much as if the South was going to win the war. Then in 1863, 64, and into 65, everything changed, and the North suddenly was victorious and demolished the South. And a lot of people have argued that that was because the blockade of the South was finally taking effect, or that the South was running out of manpower because they had so few troops, so small a population, or that the Emancipation Proclamation permitted the North to enlist blacks in the military, and that gave the North a vast manpower advantage. All of those are true. But there's a very important point that Jim McPherson makes in his book. I don't know if it's Jim McPherson, I forget the first, James. McPherson makes in one of his books that I think is fascinating, that has not really entered the consciousness of Civil War buffs. At the start of the Civil War, the generals for the North were Democrats. McClellan and a bunch of the generals were Democratic Party members who had been part of the government for the whole time. The Democrats ran the government until 1860 when Lincoln was elected. And while they advocated the Union, their goal was to restore the Union as it was, not to change it. That is, eliminate the secession and bind the Union together, but keep slavery, and don't change the plantation system. And as a result, when they invaded the South, and they attacked in Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, and in Virginia, they didn't want to destroy the South. They didn't want to live off the land. They wanted to supply themselves from their own lines by rail lines that would keep their forces supplied, because their goal was to heal the Union, not to destroy the South. And as a result, the rebels would just cut the railroad lines, and the troops would find themselves cut off from their supply base, and they'd fall back. And you had the North unable to sustain real offensive operations. That was one of the problems in McClellan's Peninsula Campaign. Then, in 1863 and 4 and 5, Republican generals who had just entered the service and were now moving up, like Grant and Sherman and Sheridan, took over. And they wanted to eliminate slavery. They wanted to eliminate the plantation system in the South. They didn't want to restore the Union as it was. They wanted a new birth of freedom, as Lincoln said. And as a result, when they invaded the South, they didn't care about their supply lines. They were going to live off the land. And part of that was a tactical decision, because they didn't want to have to be cut off from their base of supply and use their army protecting the rail lines. But part of it was a war aim, that by disrupting the plantations, burning them down, getting rid of it, you would force a change in the Southern system, and the plantation system, which had dominated the South, would be broken. And that was behind Sherman's march to the sea in Georgia and his infinitely more destructive campaign in South Carolina that's received a lot less publicity. And once they were freed of their supply lines and able to attack and live off the land, the North was constantly victorious and never really suffered any reversals. So, interesting perspective on history.